Welcome back to Unit 2 lecture notes for RSTO2431 Food Service Management. So this week for Unit 2 we're going to be talking about food service management and the role of managers. What are managers? What are they tasked to do? What are some of their characteristics, values, etc. And really we're going to be talking about a lot of responsibilities. So first of all, management in any establishment, whether it's manufacturing or the food service industry, managers are leaders. So they direct people to do the job at hand. So being leaders, we need to talk about some characteristics of leaders. What are values of leaders? So today's managers must lead by example and not simply commanding or directing. So some of the values of leaders are leaders value learning. An effective leader or manager is always learning. Leaders articulate a compelling vision. So simply telling someone to do something because you're telling them to do it isn't sufficient enough to get that job done. What you need to do is lay out a compelling vision. You want your staff that you're directing to know why that task is important, and everybody has a common goal to see that vision through, right? And it needs to be compelling. They're gonna, they should want to do it, not simply for the reason of getting paid, but because it is in their best interest and the best interest of the company, right? Leaders know their strengths and values, and they will play on that. If I know that I am strong in working with line service, right? As a manager, I will want to do that to bring an entire restaurant together, and values of hard work, and doing whatever it takes to please our guests. Those kinds of things I'm going to want to play on to motivate the people around me to get that same job done. Leaders empower others. Say, you go do this. And I trust that what you're going to do is correct. And if those leaders or managers are training those personnel properly and can put their trust and faith in them to get that job done, that empowers them. It makes those that staff feel like they are trusted and they are relied upon, that they are important to the overall process, and they will do a better job all the time. And then finally, leaders listen. Being able to not just hear people, but listen to what they're saying and get to the underlying message sometimes is extremely important. So next we're going to talk about defining management and listing steps in the management process. So what is management? In the lecture notes and in the book, it's very similar. This is what does a manager do? Managing involves using what you have, which are resources, and we'll talk about resources in just a minute, to do what you want, and that's attaining organizational objectives. So you're using what you have, the resources at hand, to get a job done, those objectives, right? So the management process can be defined as steps management performs and resources utilized in an ongoing basis to ensure guest satisfaction and profitability. And that's really in the commercial food service arena, right? Guest satisfaction and profitability. And that's not to say that non-commercial food service outlets, we shouldn't be concerned about guest satisfaction and profitability. We want to pay the bills. We want to cover our overhead. Maybe a profit is not the primary concern, but we don't want to waste money, right? And guest satisfaction is always important, even if you're working in a prison. And a good example of that is where do most prison riots start, and that's in dining facilities. So lousy food can have really bad outcomes in it, and a bad attitude by management towards that guest satisfaction, it can make a situation worse. So just keep that in mind. So there are types of resources that are available to managers, uh, and they are all in a limited supply. So we're going to talk about 7 of them. So the resources available to managers, and keep this in mind that there's only so much of each of these resources. One is people, right? That's the people you have working with you. The second one is money, right? Third is time. The fourth is energy. The fifth are products. Sixth, equipment. And seventh, procedures. So those are the resources that management uses to achieve those organizational goals. So the people, obviously, the people you work with, the money that comes in and out of a business, the time that you're able to dedicate to particular tasks. There's only so much of that. Energy. You cannot put all of your energy into a single task because other things will fall by the wayside. Products. That's in a restaurant. That's the food that you're serving. Equipment. There's only so much of that, and procedures, and that's how you get that job done. What are the steps that you need to go about to make a plate of chicken piccata? Right. That's procedures. You only have so many of those, and you don't want to make them exhaustive or inefficient or too costly. Right. So management must make good use of the available resources and develop appropriate plans of action to solve the problems most critical to the success of the operation. And if you've ever worked in a restaurant, problems arise all the time, whether it's timing conflicts, scheduling conflicts, whatever the case is. You have to have a plan to deal with them, and oftentimes that comes from experience. And from training, all right? Management must make good use of available resources and develop the appropriate plans of action, like we talked about. We're going to talk about 7 key managerial tasks related to restaurant operations, and this deals with front of the house and back of the house. So the first one is planning, all right? And planning is a managerial task. It's a task of creating goals, objectives, and plans of action to reach those goals and objectives. Right. So if your goals and objectives are $25,000 of sales per month during a lunch shift, what is the plan of action to attain it? Right. So that is how planning works. You have to have a goal or an objective, and you have to come up with an action plan to achieve that. And if you fall short, you need to evaluate the process, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Right? Factors that impact planning include information available to the manager, communication, flexibility, and implementation. And one of the reading assignments for this week is Chapter 3, and I mistakenly put that in last week's assignment, but it's for this week. It has great explanations on all of these concepts, so please get the book and read that chapter. Chapter 3 is 3 and 4 for this week. Okay. The next managerial task after planning is organizing, and that involves establishing a flow of authority and communication among people, and oftentimes that's just delegating, right? And oftentimes that's who you're reporting to. Who do you communicate to on a professional basis in your daily job, right? So the line cook communicates to the sous chef, who communicates to the executive chef, up that chain. So that's just a simple, restaurant organization, and we talked a bit about that last week. Coordinating is the next managerial task, and that's the task of assigning work and organizing people and resources to achieve those those operational objectives. Delegating is an important aspect of coordinating, and we're going to talk about the teamwork approach in just a little bit. And that's a really great part of coordinating, is creating small teams within a food service outlet, whether it's the front of the house, a receiving, whatever the case is. Having that teamwork approach to coordinating and empowering those teams to make some decisions and carry out those tasks. It's hugely important, and it takes some of the burden of responsibility. It doesn't alleviate a manager of responsibility, but it takes some of that burden of managing those tasks off of their shoulders when you can coordinate like that. The next managerial task is staffing. So that involves recruiting and hiring of applicants. The goal of staffing is to bring the most qualified employees into a food service operation. And if you've ever been a manager in a food service operation, you know how difficult that can be at times. Part of the staffing task is to make sure new hires get off to a good start, and the best way to accomplish that is provide a well laid out orientation program and introduce new employees to the organization and its internal people and objectives, and oftentimes that's done through a training program. So we'll talk a lot more about training throughout the semester. Okay, so the next managerial task is directing. Management is often defined as getting work done through other people, and that's not a bad explanation of what management does. So directing includes supervising, scheduling, and the unpleasant part of providing disciplinary measures and actions when needed. So those are all components of directing. All right. And then the next managerial task is controlling. Now, when we talk about control or controlling, that piece of terminology is very specific to how restaurants handle money, and really it needs to be based on a budget, right? So if you don't know how much money you have coming in and going out regularly, coming in through sales, going out through purchasing and payroll and overhead things like rent, electricity, gas, all of those things, you need to create a budget that looks at all of that money coming in and going out and how it's allocated and used as a tool, right? So that is really the backbone of controlling. So aspects involved in the controlling process have been covered, will be covered throughout the course, but in the simplest terms, controlling involves purchasing, receiving, storing, issuing, preparing products, serving the customer, establishing financial controls, and revenue analysis. And we're going to talk a lot more about all of these concepts throughout the semester, because they all involve money. Now, when we're talking about control, oftentimes it's security, right? Control. You think control. You want to, make sure the doors are locked, or whatever the case is. The liquor is stored behind a locked room. Yes, that's part of it, because all of those things are related to the money. So just keep that in mind. So again, we'll go over the aspects involved in control are purchasing, receiving, storing, issuing, preparing of products. And you might say preparing of products. Well, if I'm prepping food, how does that involve a budget? Well, if there's a lot of waste that goes on when preparing products, or if a manager is comping tables, that's not good for your budget, right? Serving the customer, and that would relate to the budget, in that if you do a bad job of serving the customer, that money is going to evaporate from the regular flow into that restaurant. So really great kind of set of controlling aspects right there. And I, again, highly recommend getting into the book on this chapter. It's fascinating. And then the final managerial task is evaluating. And this isn't something that we really think about on a daily basis when we're running a restaurant. Stopping, taking a step back, and saying, well, how are these processes working? How do I evaluate that? We often think of evaluation as looking at an employee's performance or whatever the case is, but we need to really take an overarching view of evaluation. So Evaluating is the management task of one, reviewing the operations progress towards achieving overall organizational goals, and that may be financial. It may be growth within the market. It may be reaching out to more people, getting more customers into the restaurant, expanding a particular meal service. Say your lunch crowd isn't what you would like to be, and you have a plan to expand your lunch service. How is that working? You have to stop at some point, a month or two or whatever down the road, and say, how did we do with this plan? You can't just say a plan's working because you get a little bit more business, because it may drop off at some point. And you have to look at the factors involved, right, and review how you're doing in that organizational goal. Again, here's measuring employee performance, and that's one we talked about already. And then also assessing the effectiveness of training programs. Restaurants and food service institutions spend tons of money on training programs. So it would make sense to take a step back and say, how effective is this training program, whether it's involved in safety and sanitation. And in this day and age of COVID, those safety and sanitation training programs are hugely important. You would not want to be the cause of an outbreak, whether it's food poisoning or COVID-19, because of a sloppy or ineffective training program. So assessing how the effectiveness of that program would be part of that evaluation task. So just keep those 7 tasks in mind, and I'll go over them again. And that is planning, organizing, coordinating, staffing, directing, controlling, and evaluating. All right. Next, we're we're going to talk about the team approach in management, and we talked about that a little bit. So in dealing with teams, what you're doing is you're giving people a little bit of flexibility in groups, because 3 heads operate better than one, and if you put 3 people to a task, they're going to get that job more efficiently than they would if you just gave everybody individual tasks to complete around that, right? So team management is a technique, process, and tools for organizing and coordinating a group of individuals working towards a common goal as a team. So if you look at your lab sessions at the college, we put you guys in teams. There's 3 people at a lab table, and that team will get more lab objectives done as a group than you would as an individual. And if you guys are taking that team approach correctly, everybody's going to taste everybody else's food, and you're going to give feedback before you present it to your instructor for evaluation, right? So in giving you that autonomy and saying, these are the tasks that you're going to perform, you 3 are going to do this, go about it. There's good and bad to the team approach, but by and large, you get way better results when you task people to do certain things as teams. And large manufacturing concerns have learned that a long time ago, and that's why you see the team approach really implemented into managerial plans, across industries, and it's not just in the food service industry. And then next, we're going to talk about marketing. So we're going to explain marketing in terms of delivering guest-pleasing service. Now, we could have a class like this solely dedicated to marketing. So it's a great subject. The book lays it out very well. The book is a little outdated on this edition that we're using on in the approach to marketing, because it was published in a time when social media wasn't as big and important in marketing as it is today, but it's got a great foundation for marketing. So let's get back into the notes. So explain marketing in terms of delivering guest-pleasing service. The most important thing to remember there is that service is important. Right? I say this all the time. good service can make up for less than great food, whereas poor service cannot really be made up by great food. If you have great service at a restaurant, you might let some things slide. If you have crappy service at a restaurant, it doesn't matter how good the food is. They've probably lost your business. So, goods, which is the food we're serving, the food that we're preparing for our guests, and services in a restaurant, they go hand in hand, and both of them together have to deliver that guest pleasing experience. We need to develop guest-friendly processes that consistently deliver products and services that meet organizational standards, and that's part of marketing. It starts in-house every day with the goods and services that we produce, and then finally continually assess and respond to guests and their ever-changing preferences. And you might look at that list that we just talked about and say, how is that marketing? I thought marketing was advertising or radio work. Not really. What marketing is looking at your business from the guest's point of view, right? And if that point of view of the guest is not favorable to your business, well, there's your marketing. So we want to have a positive outcome with marketing at all times. So yes, marketing does include advertising, be it on television, radio, newsprint, social media. That is all part of marketing. And part of what you're tasked with this week is marketing basics. You're going to do demographic studies, and you're going to come up with a marketing plan for your business based upon these studies that you're going to do. So for this week, you're going to do a demographic survey, which is you're looking at the people that you're going to serve, your target market based on your concept and its location. Who are you trying to serve? Is it 18 to 34-year-olds, or is it 12 to 90-year-olds? It depends, right? Is it people over 21 because you have a bar? So who are the people that you're after, right? That's you really have to know the market before you can come up with a marketing plan. That's why this week's project assignment is laid out like that. And two, knowing the area, right? And part of knowing the area is the competition within that area. If there's too much competition, why would you want to open another restaurant in it? Especially if you've seen them failing in that area. Maybe you want to go somewhere new. So you're going to look at at those things this week. But marketing, going back to that conversation, marketing is so much more than just advertising. It's how you get your name out there, and it is how your guests react to that name. And part of that is branding, and it's one of my favorite conversations to have is about branding. And the brand, a brand, it basically is what a customer thinks of your logo, name, image, jingle, whatever, when they experience that, right? So if you see golden arches and you're flying down the freeway, you know exactly what it is, whether you have a favorable impression of McDonald's or not. That's branding. So that's another really important aspect of marketing. And I want you guys to really dive into marketing because, like I said, we could teach a whole class about that. And the book does a very good job of laying out what marketing is and how it really relates to guest satisfaction and really how we get the word out there about our restaurants and how we sell products, whether it's internal or external, and just building up a business. All right. Okay, so that's it for the lecture notes for this week. I look forward to seeing you guys in our class meeting, and we're going to discuss more of these topics in detail once we get into the class meeting. All right. Thank you guys. Have a great week.